one thing, and then they'll roll their eyes because I said something different. Don't care. Let's get into the conversation right now with Joe Hildebrand, with Holly Hughes, and with Chris Kenny. All right, Chris, I know you have a different take on it. What am I missing here? Because, again, two things can be true at the same time, and let me be very clear from the start. There is no excuse for not telling people. There is no excuse for not telling the public. But what do you think?
I think good governance matters, Paul, and I think this is really poor governance. There's no transparency, therefore there's no accountability. Scott Morrison, in the way he dealt with these things, was really shafting his ministers, shadowing his treasurer, his Home Affairs minister, not telling these ministers that he had their powers as well in his back pocket. The secrecy is extraordinary. They're naturally enough humiliated and shocked by this. They think it's weird behaviour. If it had been revealed last year, it would have been the end of Scott Morrison. Morrison's justifications today didn't make sense. They were contradictory. Bottom line is, even if the country was at war and you're worried you're going to lose ministers every day in some street fight, you wouldn't need these powers because you can swear a replacement minister in half an hour or so. It happens all the time. So just what Scott Morrison was up to here is really, really weird, and it's very, very troubling. But you don't need an inquiry into it. We know what's happened. It's all out there. It was just weird.
But I'm saying, you know what they're going to do. But you know how it works. You know how you drag it on. You know how what we know today, and Anne Toomey writes about it well again in the Financial Review, which is, look, we know what the hole is here, that obviously you shouldn't be allowed to do it, and if you are allowed to do it, then you should automatically have to tell people. You and I know that, but you know the
no one thought you'd have to do it.
Because, you know, we've got to now say that he's Trump. We've got to do January 6. We've now got to carry on that somehow this bloke took a torch to the Australian Constitution.
Just because the Ferals will over-egg it doesn't mean it was right. It was wrong.
I'm not arguing it was right.
It shouldn't happen again. There should be a simple change that when you have any ministerial appointments made by the Governor-General, they should be gazetted, and we can all move on. What the country does need, though, is a royal commission into our handling of the pandemic, especially focusing on the state governments and their breaching of rights, their closing of interstate borders, their refusal to share medical advice, their trumping of basic human rights on our streets. And you've got to rope the federal government into that as well, because they closed off our international borders, and we've had this sort of thing going on as well. So I think we need to look at governance. What this proves is that what a lot of us were worried about throughout the pandemic, about panicked governments, exaggerating the threat, grabbing power, grabbing the opportunity to govern without any accountability or transparency, or even having to refer to Parliament or Cabinet. And this was primarily our concern with state governments. Well, it shows we've got a similar concern about the federal government. So I'm all for looking at all of that, no matter the fact that Labor will try and make hay about that. You're right, of course they will. But Labor will sink or swim on how they deal with cost of living pressures. And sure, it's frustrating they're not doing that now. But in 2.5 years' time, that's how Labor will be judged. And all the policies they're adopting now, especially in energy, are only going to make our cost of living problems worse. So I think if you want to see the comeuppance come Labor's way, you know, you're going to just have to sit back and wait and see, because what they're doing with energy is disastrous. What they're doing with the Jobs Summit is a sideshow. And the worry with Labor is not a Prime Minister having double powers over 5 portfolios. The worry with Labor is the real ministers in the real jobs, like Chris Bowen saying he's going to double down on renewables, even though all the evidence says that'll make things worse.
So, OK, now one thing that I think that all of you as people on the show, and certainly everyone watching the show, hopefully understands. I have the same conversations on air that we have off air, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's not the car park Paul and then TV Paul, and we all know that's rather unique in the way TV works, right? Everyone will play a part. So let's have the off-air chat on air right now, which, again, Joe, is to perhaps jump on an elephant in the room and also to stand back. Now, does Scott Morrison deserve all of the focus and scorn for people who disagree with this? Sure, right? But help me out. How is the scorn louder and more vicious and more personal and more forever on Scott Morrison for this versus Daniel Andrews, whose decisions, the Code Inquiry said, led to 99% of the 800 people who died in 2020? One bloke will eventually not be allowed in polite society. One guy's about to win another election.
Yeah, look, there's certainly hypocrisy involved, but not on my part at least, because I've been scathing in my criticisms of Daniel Andrews, and I am absolutely scathing in my criticism of what Scott Morrison has done. And again, obviously, there's been an anti-Scott Morrison cheer squad who have been salivating for this moment, and they are very, very happy. They were also salivating when he went overseas with his family during the bushfires. I did not jump on that bandwagon. I did not join that pylon. But I do think today that Scott Morrison is not a fit and proper person to sit in the parliament. And there are a number of reasons. I'm sure I could enumerate them if you'd like, but there are a number of reasons, each of which would be sufficient to disqualify him. But there is just one, if I can just say, there is just one reason that absolutely trumps them all. And that is that on the website of the Parliament of Australia, any citizen can go there and find out who is their government, who is the Prime Minister, who is the Treasurer, 100%. Who is the Home Affairs Minister. Now, because of what Scott Morrison did, that public document was a lie. The Australian people, whether he exercised these powers or not, and his description of exercising the resource power was beyond farcical, it was deranged. But whether he exercises his powers or not, the fact that he was sworn in as a minister in a liberal democracy like Australia, which is meant to be a bastion of open and accountable government, and the people that he was governing did not know that, violates the absolute foundational cornerstone of liberal democracy itself. Government with consent of the government, of the governed. You cannot give consent to someone governing you if you do not know that they are governing you, if you do not know what roles they have. And it is such a fundamental violation that it didn't need. The reason why there's nothing in the Constitution saying you can't do this is because the people who wrote it never thought in their wildest dreams there would have to be. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't take a dump on the dispatch box.
Good point. But also, again, devil's advocating rather than arguing.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Which is that, and again, Holly, I want to get to all the emotions that are going on inside you and the team in a second, knowing the consequences of any word you say is tomorrow's news tonight, right?
Excellent.
No pressure.
No.
But also the thing is that in 2020, now again, I can't understand how these powers were never handed back. I don't understand how it wasn't discussed with the people. But the people who wrote the Constitution never expected an Australia where we were told we couldn't go outside.
Couldn't go to a playground.
But literally, so the...
And that was also wrong, and I railed against that as well.
So the madness of 2020 is that if all of this was announced during the madness of 2020, it's a footnote.
Yeah.
The fact that it wasn't announced, it becomes, a life-defining firestorm as a way of trying to say...
It was still occurring in 2021. And by then, people were starting to be vaccinated, things had moved on, the world had changed, and COVID had taken a different perspective.
So how are you holding up? How are you feeling? Is it a surge of you want to fight it, but you also know what's happened here? What's going on?
Look, I don't know what's gone on, and to be perfectly honest, I'm still trying to kind of get my head around it, because I find it extraordinary that these powers were taken on. And again, as I said, in 2020, I think there was a little bit of fair game for anything that was going on, because I remember being on, calls where we were looking at what was happening as a government, the situation in Australia, situation internationally, and we really didn't know what was going to happen. It was the world was holding its breath and waiting to see how this was going to unfold, what was going to happen.
Right.
Well, it was back in March, April, May. I remember not sure if I was going to get back. I didn't know if I was going to get back from the Middle East, because I left when things were normal. I'm in a base in the Middle East, and all of a sudden people are having punch-ups over... well, we didn't know. But people were having punch-ups over toilet paper in the 2 weeks or the week we were away.
Honestly.
I mean, it was extraordinary.
Well, yeah,
so the 2020 is different, but
panicked.
21. Look, Chris, I'm with you. And I'm completely with you when you want to talk about a Royal Commission. If we're going to have a Royal Commission, it's not only got to be into how the federal response was, but every single state government. And I want to start seeing some of this health advice that they would go into National Cabinet, which, again, I was never a big supporter of at all. I don't like it as a model. But they would go in, unanimously come out. The Prime Minister would be there. They would all say, this is what we agreed. And then two or three of them would go off Labor cabal and announce something different.
You've got this arse about. You can't say, we had people fighting over toilet paper rolls, the country was going crazy, and somehow that's an excuse for the Prime Minister of the country to behave in a secret and reprehensible way. What on earth was he doing, taking secret powers over his own ministers and not even telling them? It seems clear he wanted to control them, wanted the right to overrule them, and the only reason he didn't tell them is because he knew that they wouldn't put up with it, and because it wasn't
Greg Hunt
good
was
governance.
apparently the only minister who knew.
That's right. And
So Greg Hunt, I think back in that 2020, it was probably...
We all know about
You can
that's
argue with
different.
you can argue with that particular case because the minister knew and because it related to this very specific, very powerful biosecurity provision. That there was a case there. The fact that he never actually acted on the one thing he should have acted on is another story altogether.
Okay,
but that still doesn't explain why he didn't make that clear to the Australian people. And if you had have said, oh, well, that was just an oversight, there was a clerical thing, that I had an arrangement with the minister with his full knowledge, it makes no difference whatsoever, but I should have told you. Fine. But he didn't do that. He then took another power. He took the finance minister's power. He then realised, hey, I can actually use this to stop Keith Pitt from making a decision that I don't want him to make. Because what? He could have just asked him to do it.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
Is Albert reversing that?
I know.
Is Albert pro that gas pipe thing now?
No, but it doesn't matter about the gas pipe. Just tell us how you oppose it. And this is the thing. This is why the Prime Minister's press conference today was so disingenuous. It has nothing to do with the gas pipe or not the gas pipe. It has to do with the fact that he's getting up there with a straight face and saying, I made that decision as Prime Minister, and I said I was making it as a Prime Minister, but I've also made it as a Minister, but I didn't have to say that I made it as a Minister because everyone knew I would have to make it as a Minister because that was what the legislation said. When, of course, he knows that absolutely no one would know that. And yet again, it's a case where the insiders seem to have, including the applicant in this case whose renewal got knocked back, and the Minister who he'd usurped, and he knows it, but yet again, the Australian public don't. And may I add, that is the only decision where he actually used the powers that he surreptitiously took.
So I also want to do the wages thing before we say goodbye to everyone else.
Sure, sorry.
And move. No, but this is the thing.
Just breathe, right? Just breathe, honey.
No, but here's the thing, right? Again, Chris, you know what it's like when you do these shows, right? There's the only audience that matters, that's the people at home, and then there are the people that are sort of searching for the dibba-dobba Twitter stuff, or the media watch people, all the rest of it, right? So again, I don't care what role I will play in that panoply of things. This is a conversation with the real people that are watching right now. How big a national trauma is this? How should we handle it? How should we process it? Because again, there'll be those that will want it to go forever, but there'll be those that will say, completely look the other way. But give me an idea about where you put this in the history of our federation, because, you know, I know you're sober on these things, and it feels like it's going to be towards the front of the boat, not the back of the boat.
Mate, there'll be a lot of political heat and light that'll be just partisan bickering and stuff, but this really concerns me. As you know, I mean, I used to have a senior role in government. I was Chief of Staff to the Foreign Minister of this country. I used to sit in on the National Security Committee of Cabinet. So I take these things very seriously, and I saw how they operated under a good cabinet government model in the John Howard years. I worked for Alexander Downer, and that's why this really worries me. This is an assault on cabinet government. Cabinet government is the system of government we have in this country which serves us well, where the Prime Minister is the first among equals. The Prime Minister is not a dictator. He's not a president. He actually makes decisions, he or she makes decisions with cabinet people around them, and a multitude of brains and perspectives and a variety of powers and portfolios. And what Scott Morrison has done here is unilaterally undermine that within his own cabinet without telling his own cabinet ministers, even his deputy leader in the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. I think that is a very, very dangerous assault on the good governance of this country. It didn't lead to any disasters in this case. I'm glad we know about it, because we can't allow it to happen again. We do need cabinet government in this country. We don't want one person wearing 16 hats secretly running everything.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing as we try to process this, right, and actually get to the reality versus the performance about how everyone feels about this, is again, because there was the one decision as opposed to a phalanx of them. And again, if there's some paper trail that eventually reverses that, then we have another chat again a bit later. That's why I think it's a little bit hard for certainly the correspondence I'm getting from the people who are watching now about trying to match up the rage versus the reality.
You'll never hear me. I'm absolutely laser focused on bread and butter issues. I talk about it all the time. My only focus is people who are poor, struggling to make ends meet. I don't care about all the woke stuff. I don't care about symbolic stuff. I nearly said a word other than stuff. But again, and there was no great trauma caused by this, but Chris is absolutely right. That's only because we dodged a bullet. It's like saying I drove 200k an hour through the harbour tunnel and I didn't kill anyone, so I should be able to do it. So what's the problem? There's no harm done. in a sense, it's a wake-up call and it's a warning. But the most important thing is that anyone who does this, anyone who behaves in this way, undermines the Westminster system, as Chris said, undermines the entire cabinet system of government, betrays the trust of their colleagues, betrays the trust of the Australian people, and then even when this is exposed and it's clear that it's not on, then tries to defend it with what, frankly, are a bunch of nonsensical non-truths. That person is not fit to sit in the parliament. If he resigns tomorrow, as far as I'm concerned, the issue is over. But as long as he is there, he is sitting as a beneficiary and as a cog in a machine, a democratic machine that he actively and secretly undermined.
Okay. I want to talk about the real wages thing because it's what actually, on top of everything else, is the practical real life example of people watching. Holly, I start the show every single night with this because it is the reality.
Yep.
And so everyone supposedly cares about it, but it sort of moves up and down depending on what else is around, right? And I know it's boring to talk about the same thing all the time, but when we hear today that the dollar you earn can buy you 2011, not 2022, then there's something serious going on. Now, yes, there's a lot that's cyclical, but if everything was personal before, it's personal now.
Yeah.
Yet the Prime Minister wasn't even asked about this today.
Well, there's no interest in it because, they probably were a bit surprised he turned up because between being overseas and on holidays, we don't see him very often. So he might not have caught up with the fact that these cost of living pressures are actually impacting on everyday Australians. And the reality is, when you look at things in the supermarket now, used to be able to get a kilo of mince for $10. It's now 800 grams for $13. The lettuce, the tomato. Taco Tuesday just got very, very expensive for a lot of families. And these are the things that are really going to matter. We've just had how long talking about, yes, something that's really difficult for us to comprehend, constitutionally challenging, potentially undermining our Westminster cabinet system
And again,
of
no
government.
party saying don't talk about it.
When you're
I'm just
out in
saying.
southwest Sydney or you're out in some of the regional areas and you're literally saying, I cannot put enough petrol in the car to drive you to footy training and the game. It's one or the other or neither. These are the things that are biting out in families. Energy bills. And if you don't think this 43% legislated emissions is not going to put more pressure on these energy power bills, going up and up and up, and all of those workers that, Labor purport to support, well, I can tell you in the Hunter Valley, most of them will be losing their jobs very, very soon.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much, guys. I enjoy the passion, I enjoy the fight, I enjoy the honesty. Again, what we do on air is the same as off air.
That's right.
I challenge any other show to be like that.
Can we do the off-air stuff with more hugs?
Yeah,
We do
correct.
do
All right,
more
no, not
hugs.
smoking. Thank you, guys. I do appreciate it. All right, quick break, back with more, including